Okay, picture this. You're trekking through the dense Cambodian jungle. The year is 1860. You're a naturalist, just looking for insects, when you suddenly stumble upon something, well, something impossible. A massive, ancient city made of stone, completely swallowed by the forest. This is the story of Angkor, a truly magnificent empire that soared to incredible heights, and then just vanished. So how on earth did that happen? Let's get into it.
Grander than anything left to us by Greece or Rome. I mean, those are the words of Henri Mouhot, the French naturalist who first stumbled upon this lost world. He knew right away that he was looking at a civilization that could go toe-to-toe with the classical giants of the West. But its sheer scale, its sophistication, it just raised way more questions than it answered.
You have to understand, we're talking about a 900-year-old complex, a total masterpiece of engineering and art that had been hidden away for centuries. Local legends actually claimed it had built itself, or maybe that it had just always been there. The jungle had reclaimed it so completely it was like its entire history had been erased.
And that brings us to the two huge mysteries that have fascinated explorers and historians for more than 100 years. First, who were the master builders behind this city of gods? And second, how could a civilization this powerful just disappear, leaving nothing but these silent stones behind?
So, to even begin to unravel this, we've got to go back to that initial rediscovery and really get a handle on the sheer scale of what Mouhot found.
To put it in perspective for you, the iconic lotus-shaped towers of Angkor Wat, they were raised a full 100 years before the great Gothic cathedrals like Chartres were even being built in France. So no, this was not some primitive city. In a lot of ways, it was way ahead of its time.
But the crazy thing is, in the beginning, there were just no clues. The local villagers had no idea who built it. There were no obvious signs of the huge civilization that must have existed to support a project like this. And then, tragically, Mouhot himself died in the jungle just a year after his discovery, leaving the whole puzzle for somebody else to solve.
For decades, the mystery just got deeper and deeper. But then, a couple of key discoveries started to crack the code, and they began to tell the story of the people who called this city home, the Khmer.
Look at this timeline. You can see this huge gap. For centuries after its peak, the city was basically lost to the outside world. A breakthrough finally came in the early 20th century, when a French scholar named Georges Cadès started translating the thousands of inscriptions on the temple walls. But the real game changer? That was a rediscovered text from China.
The key, it turns out, was a journal. A Chinese diplomat, Zhou Daguan, actually lived in Angkor for a whole year, right at its absolute peak. And he documented everything: the king, the customs, the wealth, daily life. For centuries, scholars just dismissed his account as a total fantasy. They just couldn't believe a city like the one he described could have ever existed. Turns out, they were wrong.
So, thanks to Zhu's journal and modern archaeology, we can now basically step inside this incredible city and see it just like he did, a bustling, powerful, and deeply spiritual metropolis.
The great capital was called Angkor Thom, which means the Holy City. And to help you wrap your head around its scale, just get this. The central walled city alone covered an area the size of modern-day Manhattan. This was not just a collection of temples, it was a massive, living urban center. And it was incredibly wealthy. Zhou Daguan wrote that merchants came from all over to trade, all drawn by the riches of the Khmer Empire. His journal paints this picture of a city that was literally glittering with gold and bronze, a real testament to its power and its artistry.
Life there was governed by a really rigid hierarchy. At the very top, you had the God King, or Devaraja, who is worshipped as a living god. Below him, you had ministers and generals, then this huge class of priests and temple dancers. Get this, one temple alone had over 12,000 people serving it. And then, at the bottom, were the peasants and slaves whose labor made this entire world possible. Now, this entire society, from the God King all the way down to the slaves, lived inside what everyone thought was the city. For decades, archaeologists believed Angkor Thom was the whole story. But it turns out, the city's biggest secret wasn't buried in the ground, it was hidden by the trees. The truth about Angkor's real size was so vast, you literally couldn't see it from the ground. The breakthrough came from a place nobody could have ever expected, hundreds of miles above the Earth. In 1994, NASA's Space Shuttle Endeavour pointed a special kind of radar at the Cambodian jungle. This radar could actually see right through the dense forest canopy, and what it revealed was just
Astonishing. It wasn't just a walled city. It was a sprawling urban landscape of roads, canals, and thousands of smaller settlements, all interconnected. Angkor Wat wasn't the city. It was just the downtown core.
The radar images, combined with the archaeological work happening on the ground, led to a brand new population estimate. At its peak, in the 13th century, the great metropolis of Angkor was home to nearly 1 million people.
And to put that number into perspective for you, while Angkor had 1 million residents, a major European capital like London had a population of maybe 30,000. This wasn't just a large city for its time, it was arguably the largest pre-industrial city in the entire world, covering an area about the size of modern-day London.
So how in the world did they support 1 million people in this hostile monsoon climate, with months of drought followed by months of flooding? Well, the answer was water. The Khmer were absolute masters of hydrology. They built this massive and incredibly sophisticated network of canals and huge reservoirs, called borees, to store monsoon water and irrigate rice fields all year round. It was genius.
Which brings us all the way back to our final huge question. If Angkor was this big, this advanced, and this powerful, what happened to it? Why was a city of 1 million people just abandoned to the jungle?
Well, the modern thinking is that there wasn't one single cause. It was more like a perfect storm. The empire was getting weaker from constant wars with its neighbors, especially the rising Thai kingdom. Some historians think the absolute frenzy of temple building just exhausted the state's resources. A religious shift from Hinduism to a more compassionate form of Buddhism might have undermined the whole idea of the God King. But the final blow? That may have come from the very system that gave the city life.
See, that brilliant water system was also incredibly fragile. It needed constant maintenance. And as the kingdom got weaker and deforestation started to spread, the canals began to silt up. The system started to fail, and that triggered an ecological breakdown that the city just couldn't recover from. Its greatest strength became its fatal flaw.
But, and this is a really important point, the Khmer people didn't just vanish into thin air. The civilization didn't collapse entirely. The royal court just moved. They relocated east, closer to the Mekong River, away from the constant threat from the Thais. They adopted a new form of Buddhism and totally renounced the monumental temple building and the whole concept of the God King that had defined Angkor for centuries.
You know, the story of Angkor is such a powerful reminder. A civilization can reach these unimaginable heights of sophistication and power, but so often its success rests on complex systems that are way more fragile than they appear. It kind of makes you wonder, right? What are the critical, complex systems we all rely on today?